Naeem, you're online? No, Adil,
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الرحمن علم القرآن خلق الإنسان علمه البيان الشمس والقمر بحسبان والنجم والشجر يسجدان والسماء رفعها ووضع الميزان ألا تطغوا في الميزان صدق الله العظيم.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum and a very good morning to you all. I'm Aisha Sikandar, Research Associate at Strategic Vision Institute. And on behalf of SVI, I welcome you all to this webinar on the technical assessment of India's 1998 nuclear tests and post-test rhetoric. This timely session aims to revisit the strategic and technical aspects of India's nuclear tests, as well as their broader regional and global implications. We are going to discuss key themes such as the technological claims made after 1998 India's tests, primary strategic, political and technological motivations behind India's decision to conduct these tests, political rhetoric after May 1998 tests, and how international community responded to the tests of India on 11th and 13th, and subsequently on 28th May when Pakistan conducted these tests. We are honored to have a very distinguished speakers with us who will unpack these critical themes. The first speaker for today's discussion is Dr. Adil Sultan. Dr. Adil Sultan is the Dean of Faculty of Aerospace and Strategic Studies and Acting Chair of Department of Strategic Studies, Air University, Islamabad. Before joining Air University, he was director at the Center for Aerospace and Security Studies and a visiting research fellow at Center for Science and Security Studies, King's College, London. He had also been a visiting fellow at the International Institute for Strategic Studies, London in 2015, and a visiting fellow at Stimson Center in 2006. Dr. Sultan has served Pakistan Air Force for 31 years and at the Strategic Plans Division for over 14 years, where he dealt with issues related to arms control and non-proliferation. Dr. Sultan was also, during his tenure at SPD, Dr. Sultan served as Director Arms Control and Disarmament Affairs and Director Research and Analysis at Policy, Doctrine and Strategy branch of the SPD. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. Our second speaker for this discussion would be Dr. Mansoor Ahmed. Dr. Mansoor is an honorary lecturer at the Strategic and Defence Studies Centre, Australian National University since January 2024. He was a senior research fellow at the Centre for International Strategic Studies, Islamabad from 2018 to 2022, and a junior faculty fellow and a postdoctoral research fellow from 2015-2018 with International Security Program, Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs. Previously, he was a lecturer at Department of Defense and Strategic Studies at Qaeda University from 2011 to 2015. Thank you, sir, for joining us. Now, before moving on to the speakers, I would request Dr. Naeem Ahmed Salik, Executive Director, SBI, to formally begin the session with his introductory remarks. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. I would once again like to welcome both our speakers. Welcome Dr. Adil Sultan and welcome Mansoor. Good to see you. It makes my job very easy with these two experts here. I don't have to speak much. So I will just make a few opening remarks and then hand over the stage to our two worthy speakers. As far as India's nuclear tests were concerned, not taking into consideration the 1974 test and how did it fare, we will just have a quick look at the 1998 tests. As we know, India claimed to have carried out 3 tests on 11th of May, which, according to their claims, included 1 thermonuclear test. And it has been established now over the years through statements by the scientists who were involved in the testing team that the thermonuclear test was a failure, it was a fizzle. Probably the primary of that thermonuclear device worked, but the secondary failed to work. The yield given by that test was not more than a standard fission test, or maybe at best a boosted fission test. Now the interesting thing comes is that they claim to have carried out 2 nuclear tests on 13th of May, and that I think I would urge all of you to go deeper into that, because that was an occasion once, though India claimed that they have carried out 2 tests, no seismic station around the world, including the one at Nellore in Pakistan, which was the nearest to that Indian test location, none of the stations picked any signals, any seismic waves of those tests. So what do you then conclude for that? One, that the tests were not carried out and they were just mere claims. Or the second thing is that they attempted to carry out the test and they failed. The test fizzled out. After the test, one of the Indian scientists, S.K. Sikka, claimed that one of the devices they tested was based on reactor-grade plutonium. Now, whether they tested the reactor-grade plutonium-based devices on 13th, which didn't work, or there is another possibility that the design yield of those tests would have been so low that it could not be picked up by any seismic facility. So probably some people conclude that probably the Indians were trying to prove that the CTBTO's international monitoring system has holes in that, has gaps, and it cannot detect tests beyond a certain level. And they were trying to test that capability, and they might have found out that if you carry out a control test at below a certain threshold, they will not be picked up by the international monitoring system of the CTBTO. Now I leave that idea to you to carry out further study and analysis. Look out for the seismic reports of the 1998 tests, and later on some comments on that, because this is one issue which should have generated some debate, but you hardly find any research article or any mention in any book about the nature of those tests from 13th of May. So I end my comments here, and I would now welcome Dr. Adil Sultan to make his presentation.
Sure, thank you very much. First of all, for inviting me. Is it a public seminar? Okay. तो मैंने कहा शायद हम अपना ही ईमान ताज़ा कर रहे हैं, public vote नहीं है. So if we are amongst ourselves, so we can talk more openly. And let me take this opportunity to congratulate all of you. Finally, you are out of bunker. A much better place. Very respectable. mashallah, very good. I'm sure it will definitely affect your research potential as well, because environment does matter, and now you're in a better place, and bright ideas must come from all of you. मेरे जो remarks हैं, it will be kind of, everybody will say that we have heard this before. Reason being that we have all learned from Brigadier Salik. So whatever he has been telling you, अपना जो nuclear weapons program की history और उनकी books में आपने जो पढ़ा होगा, it's not that we all think the same way. It's all that we have learned from our seniors who have more knowledge. So आपको जो चीजें पता है, आज मैं बोलूँगा शायद वो आपको new नहीं लगेगी. So it's kind of a reiteration of some of the basics that we need to continue to refresh. But there are lots of misperception. Whenever there is a crisis, there are questions about Pakistan's nuclear deterrence. Did it work or not? Even during the recent current crisis, people started talking about that Pakistan's nuclear deterrence had been, the bluff has been called, or conventional deterrence has not worked. I think as students of strategic studies or focusing on deterrence issues, we need to be very clear about these aspects. Yesterday I said something, I'll repeat the same, and this is off from the topic, but again, related to something what I'm going to say later. The contestable nature of conventional deterrence means if you can contest that, that doesn't make it less credible. And the incontestable nature of nuclear deterrence does not mean that it is more credible. Incontestable when we say you cannot contest that nuclear deterrence. If you do, then it leads to mutually assured destruction. So incontestable nature of conventional deterrence means the adversary can take chances because the cost is acceptable. That doesn't mean that the conventional deterrence has been neutralized or the bluff has been formed. The militaries, they continue to come up with options. And this we need to take into consideration once we talk more about nuclear deterrence and the purpose for Pakistan's nuclear capability. Without nuclear capability or a credible nuclear deterrence, it's my assumption that we may not have launched this kind of offensive that we call as quid pro quo plus. You had the confidence that the adversary cannot go beyond certain level. So you challenge the other side. So if you didn't have nuclear deterrence, a credible nuclear deterrence, probably things would have been different. Likewise, the conventional deterrence. But these are ideas and debate would continue to come. Another important fact why I mentioned this, there's lots of literature coming from the Indian side. And some of Pakistani commentators have also picked up, I read in the morning, that after this crisis, now there's a space where India can play with Pakistan because they think that Pakistan would retaliate only conventionally. So जो myth था हमेशा जो कहते थे कि जी perception थी कि if there would be a conventional crisis, Pakistan would immediately resort to the use of tactical nuclear weapons or short-range ballistic weapons. That was the perception being created by the Indian side, project Pakistan as a irresponsible state. So we didn't do that. Now they're coming with another narrative that we have a space to play with Pakistan because Pakistan is not going to resort to it. So both things are wrong. We never said ever, none of the official, that at the start of the crisis, nuclear weapons will come into play. The full spectrum deterrence means we have conventional responses. And the second point, whether there is a space or not, that relates to my earlier comment, the contestable nature of conventional deterrence. So the adversaries would continue to. So that was a side remark not related to the theme which was given. The 4 questions that were given, I think question 1, Brigadier Salik and Dr. Mansoor are more qualified to answer the technological claims. And Brigadier Salik has already briefly explained those. So I'll briefly cover the next three questions that are primarily strategic political objectives behind India's decision to conduct 1998 test, the political rhetoric post 1998, and how did the international community respond to India's nuclear test of 11 and 13 May. But it is also important to go back to the history. Although, as Brigadier Salik said, we will mostly discuss 1998, but you have to understand the genesis of India's nuclear weapons program. I continue to teach every semester this course, and I do emphasize why it is important to understand the genesis of what the primary drivers of India's nuclear weapons program, because that is directly reflected in their nuclear policies, or the declaratory policies. And this has something to relate it to prestige factor. So I'll try to be as quick as possible, giving the history, and then we can talk about 1998 test. So after independence, India started its dual-purpose nuclear program, that means civilian and the military side, both sides. And Nehru had great influence of the 1945 test and the impact of Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombing, because it had changed international politics. It had given phenomenal power to the United States over global politics. So Nehru thought that India is a big country, and eventually, when the time will come, so India should become a great power, and for that, nuclear weapons are a must. So that's the basic that India started to pursue its dual-track nuclear weapons program. There was the role of scientific community. Some of the people, Homi Bhabha, Magnet Sahara, who came from outside, trained, and they also pushed Nehru to build a nuclear weapons program. In 1958, Homi Bhabha gave this statement. I think Salik has also mentioned in one of his books that India can build a bomb in 18 months, provided the political leadership gives the direction or the go-ahead. Whether India had the capability or the potential to build a bomb in 1958 is immaterial, but it had the intent of developing a nuclear weapons program. So once India says that its nuclear weapons program is directed towards China, the Chinese test or Chinese war 1962 conflict, that was not a war, that was a border conflict, did not trigger any urgency in India's nuclear establishment or decision-making elite to expedite the nuclear weapons program. Then in 1964, once China tested its nuclear device, India didn't expedite its nuclear weapons program. It took another 10 years for Indian decision makers or India to build a bomb and test a nuclear device which they labeled as peaceful nuclear explosion. If China was a threat, they should have declared that this capability is against Chinese nuclear threat or Chinese nuclear weapons program, but then they gave the title of peaceful nuclear explosion, primarily to divert international or mislead the international community, because there could have been some sanctions or implications for India. That 1974 test was driven by the interest of scientific community and because of domestic political consideration. Indira Gandhi was in turmoil, there were pressures, so somebody suggested if she can prove herself to be a strong nationalist leader, things may turn around, and it did. So that was the basic purpose of 1974 test. So when Indian scholars or people, even in Pakistan, they think that India has legitimate security concerns and its nuclear weapons program was directed against China, this is essentially incorrect. The genesis, at least, was never directed towards China. In fact, once I mentioned about 1950s, the India-China relations were like Hindi-Chini Bhai. So they had very cordial relations at that time. So they didn't feel any existential threat at that time. Just a technical point about 1974 test. Yesterday night, I was just reviewing some documents, the declassified documents. The 1974 test was, from the US assessment, it was a near failure. And some of the telegrams that have been declassified and are available on the website, it said India expected a yield equivalent to 14 kiloton, but it produced ranging between 2 to 8 kilotons. So whatever it was, they said it was a near failure, but it was a nuclear weapon test, 1974, and subsequently Indian scientists who were involved in that later wrote in their own articles that it was in fact a nuclear weapon test. Now moving forward towards 1998 and pre-1998, in 1995, Narasimha Rao government did try to conduct nuclear tests or order preparation for nuclear tests. US satellite Spectre, they probably stopped India from pursuing these nuclear tests because in that time there were ongoing negotiations on Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty (CTBT). Clinton was spearheading, and he had invested lots of political capital in concluding that treaty. So they stopped India from pursuing that. This was, I think, late 1995, December 1995. The next year, early 1996, BJP government took over under Vajpayee, but it lasted for only 2 weeks. But the moment BJP came into power, they ordered preparation for the test, subject to the ratification of the government. If they continued, they would have tested. Which means this, the logic of India's nuclear test was more related to something with domestic politics, because BJP at that time, even in the manifesto, had declared that India should test, and they were pushing Narasimha Rao in 1995 as well, once they were in opposition, to conduct a test. Then they formed a coalition government that lasted only for 2 weeks. They prepared for that, but couldn't test a nuclear device. So in 1998, once the BJP government came into power with majority, so the first thing that they did was to order a nuclear test. So again, something related to their manifesto, their ideology of having a Hindutva bomb. Many international scholars, they continue to term Pakistan nuclear weapon as a Islamic bomb or something, or there was label given to even the US nuclear test as Trinity, but nobody talks about Hindu bomb. The leaders, they themselves said, we have now a Hindu bomb. So, but you won't find that in literature. So religion identity was not given to the Indian bomb. The reason some of these cabinet members, they gave a reason that deteriorating regional security environment. We had just conducted probably a test of Ori missile. That was made a justification for India to conduct a test, which was not, if you go back in 95, 96, we hadn't conducted a test. Even then they were preparing for that nuclear test. George Fernandez, who was defense minister, he said it's against a potential #1 threat, that is China. L.K. Advani, he warned Pakistan that forget about Kashmir, the Pakistani part of Kashmir. Now we are in nuclear weapons. Now a strategic equation has fundamentally changed between India and Pakistan. So those are the kind of sentiments from the Indian side. Now, if you analyze from the very start, once I was saying, what was the main driver? Why I say driver, then you will understand the intent and their nuclear policy also. There was no security threat, no existential threat. The main reason was prestige, because the United States gained that kind of clout on international politics, and India thought, or the Indian leaders rightly from their perspective, that India is a big country, and whenever given an opportunity, they should have this kind of influence in global politics. So nuclear weapons are one that can give. So fundamental reason was prestige. Second was domestic politics. The constituencies, the strategic enclave, which includes the nuclear establishment and other interest groups, they played their role. The rivalry among the scientists, they wanted to outdo other scientists, Homi Bhabha, Magnitsa, all these people, they play an important role, and that's how the domestic politics becomes the secondary factor. Security was the justification that was created after 1998. Even though at that time, we were talking with India, we didn't have these kind of relations as we have today, but India felt that justification. One of the cabinet members said it's against Pakistan, the other said it's against potential #1. Potential #1, because at that time, this phenomena or that fixation, China fixation was not there in the West, but they had calculated that they need to build their capability against China. So, coming to the impact on Pakistan nuclear choices. 1971 definitely was an important watershed in Pakistan's nuclear history. It did change our strategic thinking, but then 1974 test. Pakistani decision makers, they concluded that if they have to survive and not repeat 1971, they have to build their nuclear capability. So the real progress started on nuclear weapons program in 1975. And all this about Dr. A.Q. Khan Saab and nuclear enrichment and things like that. By mid-80s, we had conducted a core test. That means without a fissile core, we had that assurance that bomb design would work. So we had some confidence. And that confidence played in 1986-87 brass tacks exercise also, where some of the interviews were given by Dr. A.Q. Khan Saab and President Zia as well, that if required, we can build something. So that was kind of a signaling. First time the nuclear weapons came into this direct signaling between India and Pakistan was exercise brass tack. Whether we had the capability or not at that time, we hadn't done a hot test, but we had developed something. Despite our progress, our main concern was how to keep the region free of nuclear weapons. It's not because of idealist vision about non-proliferation. It was the realistic understanding that as a relatively smaller country with limited resources, this is something difficult to achieve. And if we achieve, it would be difficult for Pakistan to sustain. So we continue to offer several proposals to India. Some had political intent, but some had the real intent, how we can prevent or declare South Asia's nuclear weapon-free zone. You must have heard about all these proposals, so I'm not going to go into detail, but just mentioning 1974, nuclear weapon-free zone in South Asia, 1978, joint declaration announcing the acquisition or manufacture of nuclear weapons, 1978, mutual inspection of each other's nuclear facilities, 1979, simultaneous acceptance of NPT or full-scope IAEA safeguards, 1987, bilateral or regional nuclear test ban treaty. And this bilateral or regional nuclear test ban treaty was reiterated in 2016 during the NSG debate. That's a separate issue. Okay. So all these proposals were actually meant to stop India from crossing that nuclear threshold or declaring itself as a nuclear weapon state, because if India did, Pakistan would have no choice but to cross that nuclear threshold. But India didn't listen to Pakistan's proposal, and they tested, and hence Pakistan was forced to test its own nuclear devices. What were the international responses to India's nuclear test? First, if we talk about 1974, that's an interesting debate. Again, we look at the declassified documents, the US documents. There was a very interesting debate in the US Congress. Some of the congressmen supported that we should help India build its nuclear weapons program. And some even suggested that we should offer our nuclear weapons and retain control of those nuclear weapons against the Chinese threat. So that was the kind of, if not majority, but those notions were there amongst the US political leadership, that they need to help India. And that was a kind of acceptance for India's nuclear test. And we saw that 1974 test, India conducted a test and Pakistan was unfairly punished for this belief that Pakistan would now start its nuclear weapons program, and there were sanctions, and even fuel was stopped to our canoe, which was under IAEA safeguards, which in a kind was blessing for Pakistan, because then Pakistan moved towards indigenization and built its own nuclear program. The kind of acceptability after 1974, that was also visible post 1998. Although there was criticism on both India and Pakistan, initially sanctioned by the United States, but France congratulated. France was one country which congratulated India in 1974 and also after 1998. So that was the kind of response. Russia, again, not publicly, but not opposing, and the United States did put some sanctions. But subsequently, what we saw, those sanctions were lifted, and there was a debate within the United States that India now has acquired nuclear weapons program. Let's build a strategic partnership because it is in our interest. And then we see this movement towards Indo-US strategic partnership, the next steps in strategic partnership. Interestingly, once I joined the SPD, Dr. Naeem Salik was directed. The first document that he gave for analysis was the next steps in strategic partnership. So that was the first document. He wanted to test me, gave me a document, do the analysis and come and brief me. So that was the basis of this India-US strategic partnership. And Cold War had ended. India was playing the cards well and projecting itself to be a credible power in that region. And then we saw 2005, the joint statement, which had all the contours of Indo-US nuclear deal and collaboration, cooperation, emerging technologies, everything. And till date, we continue to see the collaboration between two countries. Most importantly, the United States efforts to bring India into the mainstream non-proliferation regime. I'm sure at least SVI analysts, they're all well aware about the NSC debate or the Indo-US nuclear deal, so I don't have to reiterate. But a country which was not acceptable at one time, then if you see now, is the most closest ally in terms of strategic partnership in this region. That's how India has moved from one place to another, and Pakistan, on the other hand, continues to face discrimination and target of criticism that we probably started this nuclear proliferation, something of that. So I think I should stop this. We can discuss the question answer.
Mansoor, over to you.
Thank you very much indeed for the opportunity. Thank you, Dr. Salik and Dr. Adil. So I'll begin with where Dr. Adil left. In terms of India's nuclear history, they started operating a 40 megawatt heavy water research reactor known as CIRUS in the early 1960s, in 1960 actually. And by the mid 1960s, India had commissioned its first reprocessing plant at the Trombay complex to separate the spent fuel from the CIRUS reactor. Now, Indian scientists had already started talking of their work on so-called peaceful nuclear explosives in the UN Geneva conferences on the peaceful uses of atomic energy. In the fourth UN Geneva conference in September 1971, the Indian delegates, the head of the Indian Atomic Energy Commission at that time, they were openly talking of that they were working on peaceful nuclear explosives. And the chairman of the PAC at that time, Dr. Ayush Usmani, he was there, and Mr. Munir Ahmed Khan was already working there in the IAEA. So it was very clear to the Pakistani nuclear elite at that time that India was moving towards some kind of a weaponization of its nuclear program. And then comes 1974, there was a crippling railway strike, and as Dr. Adil mentioned, there was a domestic political compulsion for India's government of Indira Gandhi at that time to carry out the tests so as to divert the attention in domestic politics. So the test that was conducted on May 18th, 1974, it was an implosion device, but it was in its yield was almost similar to the one that to the Hiroshima bomb, around 10 to 12 kilotons, even though it was an implosion device, which means that it was a very inefficient device. Now you can have tons of fissile material, but if the physics package and the trigger mechanism, it doesn't work, that it is going to result in a fissile yield. And almost all the nuclear armed states, the P5 states, by the early 90s, they had stopped producing fissile material, but they continued working on improving the weapon designs, the physics package, and the triggering mechanisms. So you can have a bullet in the form of fissile material, but you need to have a gun in the form of a physics package and trigger mechanism for that bullet to reach its target. So fast forward to 1998. So India carried out two tests, one on 11th of May and another on 13th of May. And there is a lot of controversy on whether these were fizzle yields or whether they worked as planned. And around 2009, the project director of the India's Defense Research and Development Organization, DRDO, that was part of the nuclear test team, K. Santanam, he, in a seminar at the IDSA in New Delhi in 2009, he made an assertion that the tests that were conducted in 1998, their yields were not as accurate as they were being claimed by the Indian government. And so the same year, two senior scientists from India's Department of Atomic Energy, who had headed the Atomic Energy Commission, Dr. Anil Kakotkar and Dr. S. Chidambaram, they issued a detailed assessment of the claims and counterclaims on India's tests, especially the one that was conducted on 11th of May, which was claimed to be a thermonuclear test and another fission test, along with a subkiloton test. And there were two subkiloton tests that were conducted on the 13th of May. So the controversy essentially surrounds the yields of the India's thermonuclear test. Now, the Indian government at that time said that the yield was around 45 kilotons. But independent experts said that the actual yield of that two-stage device was 20 kilotons, which is less than an efficient yield of a simple fission or a simple implosion device. It was not even good enough to be qualified as a boosted fission device. Nevertheless, the statement by Dr. Kakotkar and Dr. Chidambaram, that is very interesting because they say that the Indian Atomic Energy Commission has no reason to doubt the yield of the thermonuclear test carried out on May 11th, 1998. And the other test conducted by India on the same day was a 15 kiloton nuclear weapon device, which was an implosion device which almost had the same yield as India's 1974 test. So moving on, thermonuclear devices are two-stage devices. So there is a first stage, which is a normal fission bomb, and then there is the second stage. And the first stage has to work efficiently in order to ignite the second stage, which results in a thermonuclear yield. So they did use tritium because their statement by Kakotkar and Chidambaram mentions that the first stage was a boosted fission device. And they try to justify the relatively low yield of the thermonuclear test by saying that they had the designed yield was much higher, but it was tested to ensure that the surrounding villages and the population is not affected, which, according to them, is an explanation of why the yield was kept low on purpose. But nevertheless, the assertion made by these two scientists was that the fission device conducted on May 11th had a yield of anywhere between 13 or plus minus 3 kilotons, and the thermonuclear device had a yield of around 50 to plus minus 10 kilotons. And since then, they have been saying that this controlled thermonuclear yield has enabled India to develop boosted fission devices up to 200 kilotons. And that computer simulation capability to predict the yields of boosted fission, simple fission, and two-stage devices has been established. Now, this is a claim that they've been making for quite some time. But if we look at the types of nuclear delivery systems that they've been working on since then, India has been investing a lot in a full triad, especially The MIRV test that was conducted recently. There is a lot of R&D going on submarine-launched ballistic missiles. All of those tests, including the ones required for cruise missiles, can only be successful, the designs can only be successful if they are miniaturized devices. So miniaturization requires improvement in the design, in the size and the efficiency of the nuclear weapon designs from what was tested in 1974 and 1998. So the most likely explanation is that India has been conducting several types of subcritical and hydrodynamic testing since 1998 that has allowed them to miniaturize designs for MIRVs, for cruise missiles, and for the different types of submarine-launched ballistic missiles that are supposedly under development at this time. So what are the implications for the future of testing in South Asia? Now, because of the norm that has been established internationally, India might not be the first to conduct another round of tests, but if the Russians or the United States conducts tests, then of course it's quite obvious that opportunity will be used by the Indian establishment, because the 1998 test, there were 5 tests conducted in 1998. Out of those 5 tests, the 3 tests were fissile yields. So there is a technical requirement, if the fissile yields are accepted at face value, for additional hot tests. Because if you look at the track record of other nuclear armed states, such as the United States, for example, which conducted more than 1,000 tests. France continued testing up till the mid-1990s. The other explanation of India making progress towards miniaturizing its devices is that there might have been some kind of design sharing from some partners, some strategic partners. That, of course, we don't know. The NPT doesn't allow that, but India is not a party to the NPT. For example, there is at least George Perkovich mentions this in his book, India's Nuclear Bomb, that the United States had conducted several tests using reactor-grade plutonium in the early 1960s. And up till that point, the nuclear-armed states were not aware that reactor-grade plutonium can also be used for building nuclear weapons of up to the desired yields. After those tests, that information, that data was shared with France, and that was used as a quid pro quo to put pressure on France to cancel the French reprocessing plant agreement with Pakistan. So this account is there in George Perkovich's book, India's Nuclear Bomb, which was published around 1999-2000. So but France was NPT and the US was NPT. So we really don't know if there was an official transfer of information at that time. But according to George Perkovich's account, there was some kind of an understanding between France and the United States. So at face value, it seems that India has made some progress in its ability to miniaturize warheads for its full nuclear triad. But there are broader strategic implications that are important to appreciate at this point in time. There is a latent capability that is there in India's strategic program, which appears to be ripe for plucking, so to speak. So Fiona Cunningham is a leading expert on China's nuclear program, and she has presented a theory of strategic substitution. And that says that some kind of non-nuclear space, cyber, conventional capabilities can be used as sources of strategic leverage, because they create additional pathways for limited conventional conflicts to become nuclear wars through brinkmanship and calibrated escalation. And if you look at the emerging contours of India's strategic force posture, it is in the process of raising an integrated strategic rocket force through the introduction of non-nuclear strategic weapons, coupled with a trial of dual-use strategic and battlefield missile systems. And this is in pursuance of the strategy of damage limitation, which was part of a US policy to achieve overall warfighting capability to prevail in a nuclear conflict in case of deterrence failure. And so damage limitation can be achieved in two ways. You target and destroy the enemy's strategic forces on the ground and at sea, which is generally known as counterforce. And at the same time, you build elements that will allow you to intercept enemy missiles before they reach their targets. So in India's case, they are trying to build a missile shield, but there is no missile shield that is that provides 100% protection against different types of incoming missiles. So they are working on that, but more importantly, they're working on the offensive element of the damage limitation strategy, which is the conventional counterforce and aiming and trying to leverage their latent capability for achieving nuclear superiority so that they can prevail in a conflict with Pakistan or China. And if you look at the language that was used in their joint doctrine and the Indian Army land warfare doctrine, it clearly says that India should work towards deterring China while achieving escalation dominance against Pakistan. So these are some of the elements that point to the fact that they are at a point where they can leverage their latent capability. And this also explains the debate that has been going on for many years now on revisiting their no first use doctrine. Because they already have different elements in place, they're building capabilities that will allow them the operational flexibility to carry out decapitating first strikes either through conventional counterforce or through a combination of dual use systems. And we've seen a little bit of that in the way that they've been claiming the targeting of the Noor Khan Air Base and supposedly targeting some other places in Pakistan. But this is very dangerous brinkmanship because the deterrence itself, is essentially a state of mind. And if they think that they can probably prevail in a conflict, then it will be detrimental to deterrence and strategic stability. Because damage limitation, it reduces mutual vulnerability and undermines the stability of the balance of terror. And it increases the proclivity and the incentives to fight and win some kind of a conventional conflict under the nuclear overhang. But what happened last week essentially should have been a wake-up call to Indian decision makers in the sense that not only did Pakistan's conventional deterrence reestablish itself, but the fact that the standoff did not escalate to full-scale war points towards the efficacy of Pakistan's full-spectrum deterrence. But this should not be a matter of complacency for Pakistan, because at some point the Indian establishment will leverage its enormous stocks of fissile material. They already have, according to the International Panel on Fissile Materials, they have 11 tons of separated plutonium and more than 5 tons of highly enriched uranium, which is sufficient to build around 3,000 warheads. Now, I'm not suggesting that they have 3,000 warheads, but that is the capacity that exists. If you look at China's stockpiles, Chinese stockpiles are, the weapons worth of China's stockpiles is less than the weapons worth of India's stockpiles. And it is only now that China has started working on a fast breeder reactor. And this is at least a decade and a half after India started working on its own fast breeder reactor. And once India is able to complete the program of 5 fast breeder reactors, it will be able to exponentially increase its weapons grade plutonium capacity from anywhere from 26 kilograms per year today to several hundred kilograms, around 700 kilograms in a year. Now, they might not use all that material for the weapons program. It might be used for some part of that might be used for the 3-stage nuclear energy program, but it will give them enormous capability to dip into to expand their strategic nuclear arsenal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mansoor. I would just like to add a few things. In terms of post-nuclear rhetoric, I think this was a very deliberate campaign on part of the Indian leadership for 2 reasons. One, there was a large body of opinion in India which believed that Pakistan's nuclear program is just a bluff, which has been created with the connivance of the West to put some constraints on India's nuclear development. And they wanted to call that bluff and challenge Pakistan just to prove its nuclear capability. And if Pakistan failed to do that, then they would have said that Pakistan's nuclear program was just a hoax. There was no reality about it. And it would have been very embarrassing for Pakistan if we did not have a real capability or was not able to demonstrate that capability. The second reason was that since India was feeling the pressure of sanctions and other international pressure, although that was limited to American sanctions, the G8 did not agree to put any sanctions against India. France refused to do that. Russia didn't agree to do that. So these were basically the American sanctions which were there, but India wanted to dissipate those also by bringing in Pakistan so that the effect of these sanctions and pressure can be divided between the 2 countries. And that is why they were giving all those statements. Now, one thing specifically, they talked about the Pakistani part of Kashmir, and they said that we are going to now take it. Now, what does that show? That shows that India's mindset, that they have never been serious or sincere about finding a resolution to the Kashmir dispute. What they have been actually having at the back of their mind was an opportunity coming their way where they could wrest the Pakistani part of Kashmir also. And we have seen these kind of noises coming up in the recent times also. So we should be very careful. Some people have been suggesting and still suggest that India will be satisfied if we agree to declare the line of control as an international border, and India will be happy with that. But remember that they have not given up the Pakistani part of Kashmir. They will never give it up. So let's not be misled by these kind of ideas. There was this mention of 1995 effort by India, the attempt to test another device, December 95 during the Summer House government. Now, these activities were picked up by the American satellites. And the Americans, they confronted the Indians with those pictures, and they were able to pressurize them from refraining from those tests. The Americans then came to Pakistan. I remember I was at that time teaching at Qadir University, and Mark Fitzpatrick, which many of you would be familiar with, he was at that time Director South Asia Desk in the State Department. So he came and met some of the faculty members. I was also part of them at the DSS department at Qadir University, and he was trying to probe Pakistani reactions, that in case India tests, what will Pakistan do? And people were speculating that since we have made a statement that if India tests, we will have to test whether we are ready or not, and all those kind of things. So I said, you have been asking our responses. Why don't you tell us what will you do if India tests? And he very clearly stated that will come down very heavy on India. And that was the end of the discussion. But that was not end of India's desire to carry out another test. Mr. I.K. Gujral, who is generally taken to be very passive type of leader and very peace-loving and poet and all those kind of things. Even he, during his short-term premiership, attempted to carry out a nuclear test, but could not. And then, as Dr. Adil has mentioned, that once Vajpayee for the first time was nominated as a prime ministerial candidate and was asked to prove his majority in the parliament, and his government just stayed for 13 days. And the first thing he did was to order the scientists to start preparing for nuclear tests. So they were halfway through once he lost the confidence vote, and that was abandoned. So they have been trying to do it all around. I had an occasion to meet Mr. Iyengar, who was at one time India's chairman of Atomic Energy Commission. And he told me very clearly that I am convinced that our thermonuclear test was a failure, and that is why I have been telling the Indian government that they should give us the opportunity to reattempt it. Sultan has been mentioned, he has very clearly said this. Now, once these people had very clearly made it public that India's thermonuclear test was a failure, so the prestige point, which has always been very prominent in India's nuclear outlook, that was dented by this information, because they had precisely announced the conduct of thermonuclear tests to be in the bigger league. But that failed. And we saw last year, suddenly, there was a spurt in this campaign. Ashley Tallis, first of all, he wrote that book in which he very clearly suggested that if India has to become a real strategic counterweight to China, it has to have a thermonuclear capability. Only then it can match China. And he was also suggesting to the American leadership that in case India goes for this kind of a test, they should not be sanctioned or pressurized. They should be allowed to go ahead with that, because it is in our long-term interest that India is capable of challenging China in the complete spectrum of capabilities. So that campaign was started by Ashley Tallis, and then there was an article in the Clause journal by Bharat Karnad, and he has always been advocating a thermonuclear capability for India. And in this article last year, he very clearly wrote that there is a need for India to start testing its thermonuclear devices and should have a very credible and tested and tried thermonuclear capability. But suddenly, that debate, the way it popped up, it just went away. For some time, I haven't come across any kind of discussion, debate on this. But that should not lull into ignoring this fact, because India would definitely be looking for an opportunity to prove its thermonuclear credentials. And as it was mentioned by Dr. Mansoor and Dr. Adil both, that they are looking for an opportunity that if United States or Russia, they restart testing because of the difficult international strategic environment, then India would immediately jump into the array, and they will then try to find that opportunity to test their thermonuclear designs. There is another opportunity or possibility where India can do that, even without having Americans or others having tested. And that, I think, it could be a situation similar to what we have seen in the last week. That India attempting something, trying to browbeat Pakistan, but particularly with a view to gain political advantage in sensitive domestic state elections, and they get a bloody nose as they got this time. And to get out of that situation where they find themselves in a strategic and political bind, they might take this risk of carrying out a thermonuclear test to at least specify the domestic public, hoping, as they hoped last time around, that the American sanctions will be short-lived. And with people like Ashley Ellis advocating already that if India goes thermonuclear, America should accept it, they should not mind it, they should not oppose it. So be, I think, aware of that possibility, and that cannot be ruled out totally. There has been a talk about India's effort to develop a damage limitation strategy. Now, what is a damage limitation strategy? Damage limitation strategies came during the 60s, during McNamara's time. It was part of city avoidance. One idea was that if you do not hit the other side cities, they will also have an incentive not to hit your cities, because they will think that if they hit your cities, then you can start hitting the cities. So keep the cities as hostages or withholds. So hit basically the counter force targets with limited collateral damage, given the increasing accuracy of the delivery system, so that will reduce the damage to the cities and populated areas. The other idea of damage limitation was to build civil defenses, underground shelters, where the whole population of complete cities could take shelter. That idea was abandoned in the 60s because it was found to be too expensive to have these kind of shelters which could provide complete protection against the effects of a nuclear attack to the whole population. And then they are not just going to stay there. You don't know how long the effect of radiation will persist. So it could be a week, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, more than that. And for that, you have to stock those shelters with food and water and all those kind of necessities. So that was bound to be infeasible, and both sides left it. The third way of damage limitation is that what is going to cause damage? Enemies' offensive weapons. So carry out a preemptive strike and try to destroy as many as you can of the enemy weapons on ground before they are launched against you. And add to that your missile defense systems. So with the limited capacity of missile defense systems and having destroyed part of enemy's force on ground before it is launched, then you will feel more confident that your missile system will be able to take on and handle the remaining capability which will come at you, and the damage will be limited. So that is what damage limitation is about. So it has different aspects, different dimensions, and you need to study that in detail, because it's different from a normal standard nuclear weapon which we keep discussing. I think I will end here, and we still have enough time for question answers. So now we.
The floor is open to question answer session. पहले जो यहाँ पे लोग वो पिक्चर कर लें क्वेश्चन, उसके बाद we will move to the online audience. They can type their question. Dr. Nasir, starting with you.
Thank you, Aisha. I think we have just now heard very interesting and very deliberate and explanatory account of what happened on May 11th and then subsequently on 27th May. In fact, the purpose of this IIT is that normally, once we are trying to talk about the nuclear test of 1998, so in Pakistan, the most of the events start happening on 27th. So we at SBI thought that we should now start it on 11th, just close to that, because unfortunately, a lot of literature which appears, it couples Indian test and Pakistani test together, which is contrary to what actually happened. Actually, India conducted test first. It provoked, created environment where Pakistan had no other option but to conduct a response and to respond to the challenge which was faced. So this is what I suggest all those who are writing from our side, they should always remember, never get into this trap of coupling of India-Pakistani tests together. This is a trap which Indians normally, whenever they write in the same pattern. And once we should write and clearly delineate this concept that it was India which started the test and Pakistan responded. Do not take it lightly. It is a discourse which we consistently produce and it has its own impact. The next concept I would like to bring in here in the presence of Dr. Salik also and others, Dr. Mansoor, that the concept of nuclear testing has to be understood. A nuclear weapon state, if conducts one series of tests, is not enough for a credible, you can say, delivery system for different designs, for different systems to be checked. All the nuclear weapon states, the P5s, have conducted multiple tests, and still there was an urge that the last test the Chinese conducted in 1996. They started in 1964 and they kept on doing till 1996. Even the French were doing in the 90s. So what compelled them to have repeatedly conduct the test was the efficacy of the designs, was the delivery means, the systems, the ground-based system, the air-based system, and the sea-based system. So there will always be a requirement to conduct nuclear tests to confirm the designs which subsequently may appear. So if Pakistan and India have conducted one series of tests, that may suffice to display the potential of having the capability to develop nuclear weapons, but this is not sufficient to create impact of a full spectrum of weapon system. Last thing I would like to add to this forum is that the mantra of indigenous weapon capability of India. Mostly it is projected that Pakistan has developed its capability with the support of Chinese. Even the first letter which was written by Prime Minister Vajpayee on the day of conducting the test referred to that with the assistance of China, Pakistan has been able to develop nuclear weapons. So I think we already have enough of the material in which we have known that, and I've also written a recent article in Arms Control Today where I have exposed that India climbed up the nuclear ladder on the shoulders of the American and the Canadian technology. So even on the other side, and if there are, I'm not undermining the Indian capability, the scientists were there, the manpower was trained, sufficient infrastructure, but there was substantial help which they got from the other countries, especially American technology and the Canadian technology. Similarly, Pakistan also has been able to manufacture its own nuclear weapons, but you cannot undermine the capacity of its manpower, the scientific infrastructure, the effort which went in the designing of its own infrastructure. So it is comparable to what India did. Had there been only the technology, the Libyans would have conducted the test. They had sufficient equipment, but they could not do so because there was no manpower. And the last thing, I would always, taking advantage of this kind of gathering and deliberation, that normally India projects that Pakistan conducted acts of aggression against against India. And this was also used in the Prime Minister's letter on which was leaked out on 13th of May in New York Times. 1971 is a clearly Indian act of aggression. If they claim it, and there's no, I think, not a single evidence to that Pakistan crossed any line. There was an internal turbulence inside inside East Pakistan, and India took advantage of that, and they have a lot of, now they take a lot of pride in militarily intervening in that. So 71 out, 1948, it was the continuation of the violence of the partition, the violence which was happening inside Kashmir, inside northern areas. Pakistan army was not organized. There were still Indian units inside Pakistani territory. The Pakistani chief of army staff refused to send the troops on the request of the Governor General, Qaid-e-Azam Muhammad Ali Jinnah. So Indian army, on the contrary, had under the organized Indian leadership, was sent to Kashmir, and they were fighting the disorganized, or you can say the Lashkar. So 48 is also out. 65. 65, it was India which crossed the international border first. Pakistani troops were fighting inside the disputed territory. So these all three acts of aggression were absolutely, we normally, once we pass over these, comments of the literature, we just also accept it. And a lot of Pakistani scholars also use it. So just for a word of caution to remember that, and just to correct the history, I just wanted to add that. Thank you very much, Adil.
Yes, any other question?
Sir, thank you very much, Dr. Adil. Always a pleasure, and Dr. Mansoor as well. Running with the hypothesis that India does test a thermonuclear weapon, especially given the current domestic situation as well. What do you think will be the impact for the region? And when I say region, I particularly mean Pakistan. Are we also pulled into another arms race where we will also have to test it to ensure our deterrent capabilities? How do you foresee it?
There could be political compulsion. I think not necessarily there could be a technical compulsion for Pakistan. Once India does something, definitely there will be pressures for Pakistan to respond in whatever way. Otherwise, I don't see that we require thermonuclear weapons. Because if our doctrine is about preventing aggression from India, not to become a global power, and not to build ICBMs, weapons that can destroy major mega cities like Cold War. So, in my personal opinion, yes, due to political compulsions, we might be pushed towards that direction. Technical, as I understand, if we talk about deterrence, the credibility of deterrence, the past 4 crises now we have post 1998. If you exclude Kargil, because we were just very young nuclear weapon state, we have established the credibility of nuclear deterrence. That is credible. That's why India is continuously exploiting different venues, different options to engage at the lower spectrum of conflict. So that also vindicates that your nuclear deterrence is credible enough. So I don't think so. There should be any, but that's my personal opinion. Let's take a different role now.
Dr. Mansoor?
Thank you. So in terms of testing, so Pakistan and India both. So India had the advantage of the 1974 test. They had data from that time. But Pakistan successfully demonstrated that you can build a credible technical nuclear capability through cold tests without resorting to hot testing. So between March 1983 up till 1995, the Atomic Energy Commission conducted more than 24 tests. And in those tests, there were 4 to 5 different designs that were perfected and which were then hot tested in 1998. In terms of post-98, both India and Pakistan have worked towards building their respective nuclear triads. They've miniaturized their devices, their warhead designs. If you are building a single stage fission device or even a boosted fission device, you don't really need to have a hot test. Cold testing, hydrodynamic, subcritical tests have proven their worth. But there is no substitute to hot testing for a thermonuclear device because they are 2-stage devices. So boosted fission devices can be anywhere between 50 kilotons and 150 kilotons, which is good enough for establishing a credible deterrent capability for both countries. But if India conducts a test, I remember Gurmeet Kanwal used to say this, that if there is another round of testing, both countries should carry out tests purely for technical reasons and then sign the CTBT. But that is for the decision makers to decide. It's not just a technical compulsion. There'll be geostrategic compulsions that will drive any decisions to respond to any such testing. But I would again reiterate that probably India will carry out another round of hot tests whenever it finds the opportunity, because there has been a stated requirement from their scientific community to go down the thermonuclear route. And another reason why I think that India might be tempted to go down that route is because what we saw last week, India does not have a decisive conventional edge over Pakistan. It certainly does not have any kind of conventional superiority along the line of actual control with China. And they will find it very difficult to achieve their desired objectives because Pakistan has been building its conventional deterrence capability in tandem with full spectrum deterrence. There was a question, I think I should answer it by Rubina Wasim. So what happened last week was Pakistan was forced to reestablish the credibility of its conventional deterrence. Now, if you go back 10, 15 years, in response to India's Cold Start doctrine, Pakistan introduced TNWs and came up with a full spectrum deterrence policy. But that was in the nuclear domain. At the same time, Pakistan continued with fine-tuning the new concept of warfighting and its conventional force modernization, which proved its worth on 7th of May. But the fact that the conflict did not escalate beyond a few missile strikes on either side using standoff weapons, and that there was no full-scale mobilization to an irreversible point that would have triggered an all-out war. And Pakistan was only responding, and that too after exercising a lot of restraint, points to the fact that not only did Pakistan's conventional deterrence work, but India's faith in its own offensive capabilities has been dented, at least in the eyes of the international community. And that in itself will probably be another factor that might drive a further growth in India's nuclear capabilities. They have enormous latent potential, and I've been writing about this and saying for a very long time. They have huge stockpiles of the material for a nuclear warfighting capability. You should not be surprised if there are elements within India's strategic community that might call for building low-yield battlefield or theater nuclear forces against China and Pakistan to achieve nuclear superiority. Because that is the only way that they can probably move towards a strategy of nuclear brinkmanship. They have tried to do that through conventional counterforce. They were met with a disproportionate response. They are trying to build an integrated rocket force, which will be conventional in nature. But you might see that there is even greater investment, and there are already developments happening on the ground. Their fast breeder reactor program is now in the first fast breeder reactor is now in the process of being commissioned. And it will be followed by at least another 2 fast breeder reactors. And they have plans for a total of 6. So there is no other explanation of having fast breeder reactors outside IAEA safeguards if that is not meant for a nuclear breakout capacity. Now, China, there is a lot of literature in the international scholarly circles saying that China is the a third nuclear peer. I would call India as an emerging fourth nuclear peer, which will have commensurate capabilities with all the P5 states, including long-range SLBMs, ICBMs, and the ability to conduct nuclear warfighting should the need arise. So they will work towards having options and to introduce different kinds of vectors into their responses in a future conflict with either China or Pakistan, particularly Pakistan, because anything that is being developed for China can be potentially deployed against Pakistan.
If I may add very quickly to this discussion, first of all, I think the need for nuclear tests. Last time, 1998, we had no other option but to demonstrate our capability. This time, we will have the option, whether or not to test, depending on the situation prevailing at that time. So it will be political decision mainly. I don't think so there is any technical compulsion. Why? Because we very clearly have said number of times, and we continue to maintain that our nuclear deterrence is aimed at India. It is India-centric. We are not looking at global capability. So we do not, why France, China, others were conducting tests in 1996, and the Americans and Russians conducted thousands of tests, because they had global ambitions, and they were trying to develop different kinds of weapons with very sophisticated warheads and delivery systems with great accuracy. We are not going to do that. We are in for credible minimum deterrence. And for that, we have sufficient capability. There is no compulsion. If there is public pressure, obviously there will be public pressure. If India tests, the natural reaction in the Pakistani public would be to respond to that. But then it is the leadership's sagacity at that time, because if leaders are pushed by the public to take a decision, then they are not the leaders. Leaders should be leading, not be led by the public. So that has to be thought out very clearly. Second thing is number of tests. Number of tests do not really matter as far as I am concerned. Why? Because any country which has attempted to carry out a nuclear test, it has always worked. Even North Korea's first test, which was said to be a failure of sorts, because it yielded very little, about 3 to 4 kilotons. It was much less than the designed yield, but it still worked. There was a nuclear detonation. India conducted its first test in 74. It worked, although it did not give sufficient yield, but there was a nuclear detonation. Pakistan carried out its hot test for the first time in 98. They worked. So the history of nuclear weapons says that anybody who has attempted to detonate a nuclear device, it has always worked. It's not the number of tests. Number of tests refine the designs and give you more yield. But even if you do not get 100% design yield, even then deterrence will work. So let's not get into that debate of number of tests, whether we need it or not. We should be very clear about what our objectives are, and for that, what do we have. I think we should now give a chance to the online participants, get a question from there, and then we can come back to the audience.
We have a question from Taiba Khurshid, a research officer at this AJK. What was the role of nuclear deterrence in recent Kashmir crisis and subsequent escalation between India and Pakistan? Modi in his speech has referred to nuclear blackmail by Pakistan, which India will not tolerate. How do you see the statement in the setting of a new normal where India breaches our sovereignty time and again on the pretext of terrorism under nuclear umbrella?
Okay, I think at the very start, preamble, I did mention, if we didn't have the nuclear capability, probably arguably, we wouldn't have responded the way we responded. We had the confidence. If the crisis escalates to beyond conventional, so we would be able to deter India from further escalation. So nuclear deterrence played critical role in this crisis, in the previous three crises, if we exclude 99, but the rest of the crisis, I think nuclear deterrence was fundamental. Now, talking about Modi's assertion of nuclear blackmail, nobody had threatened India with nuclear weapons. We just responded conventionally. There was not even a mention of nuclear use. Yes, signaling was done, Abdali was tested, but that's what we had been doing earlier as well, because our deterrence posture, the full spectrum deterrence, is not separate. The conventional and nuclear are not separate. And I would just like to clarify, because Dr. Mansoor said, I don't know whether he meant or not, that we developed a conventional deterrence in tandem with full spectrum deterrence. My understanding, as following the statements of senior leaders, especially General Kidwai, the full spectrum deterrence comprises of your conventional and nuclear responses. The conventional will always come first. And if conventional is not adequate to deal with the situation, the nuclear responses are inbuilt in that full spectrum deterrence. That's why we say full spectrum deterrence. So it is not a separate conventional and
It continues.
Yes. So I think full spectrum deterrence work, and you may have heard this term, especially since AJK, you have been part of those conferences, जहाँ पे General Kidwai ने भी कहा, quid pro quo plus. That's an addition that at the conventional level, whatever India tries to do, it will get a response with a premium. And this is what we did in the current crisis as well, in the Balakot crisis as well. Thank you.
Sir,
Well, thank you very much, sir. Thank you to Dr. Salik for giving me the opportunity to brush up my knowledge and recap some of the old concepts, which is difficult at this stage now. But actually, I just intervened and requested for the question or getting the floor, because my question is related to the discussions that have just been had. Prime Minister Modi in his speech also said that any act of terrorism will be taken as act of war. So that means the conventional threshold has also been lowered. So should that mean that even now pitching the doctrines, the war-fighting doctrines at the conventional and nuclear level of the two countries against each other, will the nuclear weapons now come into play much earlier than before, as per the doctrines of the two countries?
So my personal understanding is this is not the case. It was a political statement that he made, that any act of terrorism be considered as an act of war. That's his statement. But the last two crises, what we have seen, so if they want to lower the threshold for a conventional response, we have, I think, adequately given a loud and clear message that there would be a response plus, quid pro quo plus. Now, if India still thinks that's an affordable punitive measure that is acceptable to their political leadership, and if still they want to try next time any such act which happens indigenously or whosoever conducts that, and if they are threatening to, that means they are accepting that they want that punitive measure is acceptable to them, because in both the crises, the outcome was very clear. But taken from the same point, I think, personally, I think if they think that any act of terror is an act of war, probably we should also declare the same thing. Because from our perspective, Kashmir, whatever happens in Kashmir, the militants they do, yes, civilians should not be killed, but other acts, that's a legitimate struggle for freedom. anything happens in mainland Pakistan, Balochistan, that is a terror act. So if India thinks that they can only declare unilaterally that any act of terror would be responded with conversion, I think now we should have confidence that we should also state the same, anything happening linked to India with proofs, of course, not like India. We should also consider that as an act of war, and we can also launch punitive strikes. And I think the recent episode demonstrates that we have more capability than India, at least in the aerial surgical strikes.
Dr. Mansoor?
So if you want to conduct war fighting, you need conventional forces. So let's go back to what happened in NATO versus Warsaw Pact in the 1960s. So NATO deployed thousands of tactical nuclear weapons along in front of the East German and West German border because of overwhelming Warsaw Pact conventional superiority. And that was also a part of the flexible response strategy. But flexible response also included the option of investing in conventional forces. And by the 1980s, both the Soviets and the Americans and NATO and Warsaw Pact had started investing in precision-guided munitions and long-range vectors. And the Soviet General Staff accepted that these new types of technologies will have the same effects on the battlefield as tactical nuclear weapons. In the India-Pakistan case, for a very long time, the general perception in the narrative, now deterrence is a state of mind, so narratives play a very important role. For a very long time, much of the focus of Pakistan's deterrent posture was on the 60-70 kilometer range Nasr missile. That had its own purpose. It was against Cold Start to plug the gap at the tactical level. And the general impression that was created was that Pakistan does not have the conventional warfighting capability to deter and, if necessary, respond in kind. So there was cognitive dissonance that was at play. And second part is that India 15 years ago had a much greater conventional edge. It does not have that edge anymore because of the restructuring of some of its ground forces and some of its air forces along the line of actual control. But even otherwise, assuming that 90% of India's offensive capabilities are deployed on the Pakistani front, for example, look at their air force. They have a sanctioned strength of 42 fighter squadrons. They are down to 31 fighter squadrons, and out of those, at least 6 to 7 fighter squadrons require replacement. If you look at the size of the Pakistan Army and the size of the Indian Army, Pakistan has a much higher density of armor, mechanization, self-propelled artillery, and it has better logistics because of the geographical proximity of the cantonments with the border. So it has a much quicker reaction time. Secondly, even in the naval domain, like 15 years ago, 10 years ago, the situation was that they had a numerical superiority of, say, 7 to 1 or 5 to 1. So Pakistan is closing that gap to a comfortable level. We are not seeking parity, but there will be a strong conventional deterrence posture with the acquisition of new platforms in the subsurface, surface, and the naval aviation domains. So this entire conventional asymmetry, the narrative around conventional asymmetry has played into the building of India as a net security provider in the region. And that has also had an effect on the confidence level of the Indian leadership that probably they can engage in risk manipulation and get away with it. But they were not only the Indians, but everybody else was taken for, they were surprised at Pakistan's reaction. And probably now they, regardless of the fact that they invest in expanding their conventional capabilities, I think the promise of the integration of different sets of technologies that will in itself will play a greater role in the way that capabilities result in outcomes on the battlefield. In fact, there is a very good book by Biddle, Military Power, in which he gives the theory of military preponderance. And he says that you can have numerical superiority, but that will not necessarily translate into an operational success on the battlefield, because that will depend on a lot of other factors. And you have the example of the Germans in the Second World War. They were always outnumbered by the Red Army and the other allies from 1939 to 41. Yet they were able to fight a war for over 6 years, almost 6 years, with all those odds on their side.
Yeah.
Sir, I want to ask Dr. Adil, you have said, sir, that contestation of conventional deterrence won't make it less credible. So to my understanding, deterrence is a psychological phenomenon. If your adversary is convinced that the risk attached to the action being taken, he will not take the risk. If the initiative is being taken, do you think that deterrence also be at this state deterrence? What would be the state of deterrence in your mind if the action is being taken by the adversary? And secondly, in response, in reference to the recent episode of the conflict, Pakistan retaliated in the morning, whatever the operation name was. Do you think that you said that?
क्या नाम था वैसे? मुश्किल सा नाम. So whatever the name.
Sir, if the retaliatory strike has been taken, so considering the principles of deterrence, India or any adversary should not hit us back, but India retaliated again in the afternoon. So, sir, do you think that strike was retaliatory in reference to QB, which should have terminated the conflict? If the conflict was not terminated, won't it be questioning the credibility of the strikes? What do you say?
अच्छा, देखो interesting, and it's good that you are thinking so. Deterrence, what we say is psychological, ठीक है? So psychological means if the adversary can be convinced the costs are unacceptable, so that adversary would be deterred. So unacceptable, there's only one way: nuclear. You eliminate entire humanity. So that's the unacceptable cost. But if the cost is the adversary thinks, okay, let's see, maybe 5 aircraft would be down, 10 aircraft would be down, a couple of bases, that's affordable cost, then they make a choice whether they want to launch or not. So conventional deterrence, I'm saying, is therefore contestable, but it doesn't make it less credible. Okay? Credible तो होती है, proportional उसके अंदर कर रहे हो, उसकी credibility तो होती है. It depends कि आप you can take risk. Okay, that's affordable cost जो we saw in this recent crisis. ठीक है? The nuclear का uncontestable वो होता है. So deterrence दोनों जगह है, लेकिन ये नहीं है कि deterrence का concept बिल्कुल आप nuclear से उसको देखें. Conventional का एक different वो आता है. Now coming to this quid pro quo, military strategies में देखो, there was lots of information, misinformation, disinformation. India is a bigger military. It was inflicted a loss or humiliation at the very start. Just take the air factor out. If we had not shot down 5 aircraft, how the battle would have unfolded. Maybe both sides would have different narratives, both sides claiming victory, but the fact that this was authenticated by neutral observers of international media that these aircraft were shot down. Okay? That was a major psychological blow, the advantage that Pakistan got. In air battles, anything can happen. It's a matter of seconds. Decision making tips mein aata hai. Lekin we got that advantage, and we, because of that advantage, we became more confident, and we launched something as planned, whatever it was done. And India had to respond. Because political compulsion, again, war is all about politics, ठीक है? या आप domestic में कर ले या international level पे कर ले, आपके जो leadership है उसे political objectives के achieve करनी है. So at this time, Prime Minister Modi's reputation was at stake, so he had to respond, and probably we were also prepared for that. उसके counter response के हिसाब से, ठीक है? अच्छा, we can get into this debate, लेकिन I'm happy that you are raising these questions, and I would urge you कि do not fixate yourself in terms of nuclear deterrence. We have learned a lot. We have analyzed all the crises. Nuclear deterrence has proven now between India and Pakistan, there's not going to be a major war because of nuclear weapons. Secondly, because of several other factors, emerging technologies, which makes more wars more kind of workable. ठीक है उन technologies के जो अभी example हमने देखा. So you should be thinking about the concept of like integrated deterrence, not the US concept of integrated deterrence, the Pakistani concept of integrated deterrence. The way this conflict unfolded, where different capabilities they played their role. मैं इसको again, I'll just take this moment. I think time भी खत्म हो रहा है, so conclusion उसके अंदर मैं मतलब I'm not doing conclusion, लेकिन I want to address some of the points in terms of Dr. Mansoor said that the conventional asymmetry is now narrowing down between India and Pakistan. I slightly disagree with that. In terms of quantitative advantage, India will always have that because it is spending $77 billion annually, and we do not have that money. We are spending $10–11 billion. So you cannot compare in terms of quantitative. Pakistan and India can narrow down over ships, maybe jahaz, maybe. If India has certain number of squadrons, we have less than them. The whole जो success हुआ या जैसे unfold हुआ अभी उसके अंदर, it's all about how you integrate these technologies. These days, it's not about tech. वो पुराने ज़माने के अंदर जो tanks कितने हैं तो utterly महीने तक fire कर रही जो कुछ कर रहा है. The border wars are going to be quick, swift, और उसके अंदर जो है आपकी जितनी टेक्नोलॉजीज को आप इंटीग्रेट करें किस तरह से आउटकम ले सकते हैं वो है. तो इफ यू हैव डन इट बेटर देन योर एडवर्सरी with limited capacity, you saw the advantage. And I think that's where we need to think as researchers also, because there's so many lessons from there. Debate has moved on. I'm sure आप लोग ये चीज डिस्कस कर रहे होंगे कुछ अरसे से हम we were talking about cross domain deterrence. ठीक है, integrated deterrence जो US security policy के अंदर आया था. So we were looking those things from their perspective and trying to analyze where India and Pakistan. Now we have to develop our own literature because the rest of the militaries will be looking towards Pakistan, how we develop our future force posture, because we have proven themselves modern day battle के अंदर between two nuclear weapon states. This is one classic example, a case study to research for everyone. Okay, एक किस तरह से integrated deterrence, a smaller country, how it can integrate its conventional and nuclear capability and deter a major adversary. ठीक है, उसको political objectives करने के. तो ये एक वो है. Just one nuclear superiority की एक बात जब आई quickly, I think nuclear superiority, if you have nuclear, unless वो 1000 or 10 का number हो तो yes you can say, otherwise if you are kind of same numbers, you cannot have that nuclear superiority. But I'll also refer you the Federation of American Scientists recent report, जो warheads की बात करते जो हम endorse नहीं करते because we don't know. लेकिन वही असेसमेंट जो कई सालों से जो ब्रिगेड सालिक भी हमें कहते थे कि जी हमेशा पाकिस्तान 10 पीछे है तो हमें कहते थे फास्टेस्ट और इंडिया को कभी नहीं कहते. 24 में इंडिया 172, 170 अकॉर्डिंग टू दैट ट्रेडिशन ऑफ अमेरिकन. दिस ये रिपोर्ट 180. तो इंडिया इज नाउ फास्ट ट्रैकिंग इट्स न्यूक्लियर डेवलपमेंट. चाइनीज को उन्होंने 500 का बताया तो उसको भी फोकस करें कि उनकी डेवलपमेंट किस तरह से हो रही है. जो ब्रिगेड सालिक ने पॉइंट किया आई थिंक test thermonuclear. So I was just thinking, probably if Modi government faces that domestic backlash pressure, this could be the time for India to test thermonuclear device to divert their attention from their military failures. And again, establish his credentials of a nationalist leader. Why I'm saying this is, they agreed to ceasefire. So United States has limitations. They cannot push India beyond a certain limit because their interests converge with India. So probably there would be less pressure on India अगर उन्होंने टेस्ट कर लिया इस चीज में. ठीक है, तो ये I think some of the points. Thank you very much.
I think we have already overshot the time. Let me very quickly conclude a few points. Chef, to your point, if you read military history, conventional deterrence has never worked in history. It has failed even in situations where there was a weaker adversary against especially against a stronger adversary, even the weaker adversary took a chance. Given the environment, they looked at an opportunity and took a chance, and knowing that if they fail, the consequences will be bearable. In the nuclear, you do not have that luxury. So conventional deterrence will break. But as it has been mentioned here, that in case of India and Pakistan, in this recent conflict, India thought, and they have been advocating for many years, that there is a space for a limited conflict below the nuclear threshold. We have the right to test that space. In 2019, they ended up having an embarrassing situation, losing 2 aircraft, losing a pilot to Pakistan, who was returned later on. And in this case also, they ended up badly off. So it's not a good situation for them. A larger military numerically, at least on papers. Pakistan has always, knowing the numerical difference with India, has always emphasized qualitative edge. Better training, better equipment, and qualitative advantage. And that has been particularly in the case of Pakistan Air Force. Pakistan always had better in 65. Pakistan had better aircraft than India in 71, and also the skills of our pilots. India could not match that in 65, in 71, and even now. So all these things, they do matter, that you can cover up some gap, quantitative gap, with qualitative edge. That has been proven here. Now, India, whatever they wanted to achieve, to take a political advantage, they have actually been worse off at the end of all these exchanges. That brings us to Dr. Zafar's point, referring to Modi's speech post-conflict. Now, what else he could say? Now, he has said that any incident of terrorism will be act of war. And we have said that any abrogation of Indus Water Treaty will be an act of war. They have already held it base, have started a war. The point is that this convention conflict will continue, that stability and instability paradox will always be in play. But remember that you should not lose confidence in the viability of nuclear deterrence, because it was the shadow of the nuclear deterrence which kept this conflict limited to this level. It did not go beyond that. Otherwise, in 2019, as well as this time, India, having embarked on aggression and accepted a loss of face, but still went for ceasefire. If nuclear shadow was not there, they would have continued to expand the conflict to an all-out war. Since they have not gone there, and they have seen the limitations of this kind of strategy also, that should give us renewed confidence in the credibility of nuclear deterrence. So that's what it is all about. I think we have had a very comprehensive discussion. We were lucky to have two very accomplished experts in this field. And I wish we had more time for questions, but this is how it always. But I think the answers which were given to the questions which were taken up were so comprehensive and extensive that they must have covered a lot of other questions which were in your minds. So I think this is not the end of this deliberation. You have to carry it on, continue with this, take away some key points from this and some ideas which might have agitated your minds. Work on that, do your own research, and we are going to have another event on 27th of May. So you will get another chance to not only refresh your memories and knowledge about the nuclearization of South Asia, but also those questions which are still lingering in your mind, you will get another opportunity to get them clarified. So once again, thank you very much for all of you listening patiently, and all those who joined us online. I would especially like to thank Dr. Mansoor for finding time to join us, and Dr. Adil. I know he's very busy, and he left a very important meeting at the Yale University to join us. And we also welcome Dr. Zafar. I think it was a very comprehensive discussion and event, and whatever we had, the objective with which we had started with and planned this event, I think we have more or less achieved everything which we desired. Thank you very much.
Just taking this opportunity, 28th we have this conference, Mark